This is the untold story of the making of the modern world. A fresh perspective, charting the spread of civilization across the globe. From the dawn of mankind and the first cities and empires, to the belief in one God. We follow the flow of civilization from the Middle East, an extraordinary place that has been a vital link between the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe for millennia. An economic, scientific, and cultural center of the world. It will be an epic journey of discovery. From the east to the west. This is the story of the birth of religion. Here in the Middle East, it inspired the journey of civilization. In this program, we explore early man's struggle to understand and explain nature, life and death, and the world beyond.
They are not ancestors, they are not priests, they are beings from another world.
We discover the first temples of the Middle East and how the pantheon of pagan gods that ruled from Mesopotamia to Egypt and Greece to Rome were overthrown by a revolutionary idea: monotheism.
It's absolutely a watershed moment in history.
It's the story of the difficult birth and eventual growth of this idea that came from the East to dominate the West and much of the rest of the world. Monotheism, the belief in one universal God. The idea of one universal God is so integral and familiar to our culture that we forget that in a world of many gods, it was once a radical idea. Where did it come from? How did it grow? Why did it succeed? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all look to Abraham as their founding father. The story of Abraham first appears in Genesis, the first book of the Jewish Bible.
When you open the Bible, you very quickly come to Abraham. And basically the whole Bible from then on is the story of one man's family. And that one man is Abraham. Everything is about his encounter with God, his experience with God.
And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great.
According to the Bible, Abraham spent much of his life in an ancient city in Mesopotamia called Haran, believed to be in what is now Turkey. In Haran, people worshipped many gods. Like the rest of the ancient world, polytheism ruled. The defining moment in Abraham's story, why he is synonymous with monotheism, came with a command from God.
Take your only son, your beloved son, and go to the land of Moriah, and there you will sacrifice him to me.
The basics of the story in Old Testament and Quran almost the same, but the different in details. The story is that God would like to test the true beliefs of Abraham.
And when they come there, it is clear now to both of them that the sacrifice is going to be the son. The only son, the beloved son, is going to be sacrificed. But on the crucial moment, there is a voice from heaven. Don't touch the child. I don't want him to be sacrificed. You have proved yourself to be loyal to God.
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam share a belief in Abraham as the founding father of their faith. But some details of the story differ. In the Jewish tradition, Abraham's intended sacrifice was in Jerusalem. Jews erected a temple here to commemorate the spot. It was said to be one of the greatest buildings in antiquity. The temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, rebuilt, then destroyed again by the Romans. The surviving Western Wall is one of the holiest places in Judaism. Above it today is the Dome of the Rock, the oldest surviving Islamic building in the world. Muslims believe it is the site of the Mi'raj, where the Prophet Muhammad was taken to heaven to meet with God. In Islamic tradition, the sacrifice of Abraham took place not here, but near Mecca in modern Saudi Arabia. It's impossible to be precise about Abraham. Biblical chronology suggests he lived nearly 4,000 years ago, but there is no hard proof of his existence.
There's no archaeological evidence of Abraham. He didn't leave a monument somewhere in the desert saying Abraham was here.
There is a growing distance between what people think about history of this region according to the biblical text and what archaeology shows. So it is extremely difficult and tricky to reconstruct even the germs of history from these myths.
In recent years, an incredible series of archaeological discoveries have revealed the real story of the development of religion and ultimately the idea of one God. The story begins thousands of years before the biblical time of Abraham. Over 11,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened here, in a place known as Göbekli Tepe, on the upper Mesopotamian plains of southern Turkey. These mysterious stone pillars give an amazing insight into the birth of organized religion. They were erected here right at the dawn of civilization, before the birth of agriculture, when man was a hunter-gatherer. Religion springs from the timeless human need to understand the world, explain natural disasters, life and death. Professor Klaus Schmidt, who leads the excavation and study of Göbekli Tepe, believes these T-shaped pillars represent human beings.
Here we have the proof that the meaning of the pillars really is a meaning of anthropomorphic beings. You can see the big arm coming down here, and we have here the hands, the fingers like this.
These strange human-shaped monuments appear to represent supernatural humans, visitors from an imagined spiritual world.
There is never a face depicted on these T-shapes. They are faceless, without eyes, without nose, without mouth. So I think it's a clear indication they are not from our world. They are not ancestors. They are not priests. They are beings from another world, gathering here in an eternal meeting. These structures are not done for daily life, so it's a sacred sphere we have here on this mountain.
There are no houses here at Göbekli Tepe. This is a special place. Man built this gathering of supernatural beings to make a connection with the afterlife.
This pillar in the north of enclosures D maybe is showing us what's going on here in these enclosures, what the purpose had been for these enclosures. We have here vulture, a very big vulture, with his wings in such a position. There are more birds, there are snakes, there are other symbols, but there is a very big scorpion depicted here, and there are other animals, and here below there is clearly a human, and clearly there is no head on top of this body. And this complete image looks like an illustration of the netherworld, not of our world here. And so maybe it's leading us to the function of these enclosures being made for burial customs.
Professor Schmidt believes that in these enclosures, early man practiced a ritual ceremony to mark the passing of their dead. The monumental structures of Göbekli Tepe are a landmark in human development. Here, 11,000 years ago, a revolution occurred. Hunter-gatherers paused to build a special place to commemorate the journey from one world to the next. The Stone Age people of Göbekli Tepe witnessed death, the power of nature, and the changes in the seasons, and created a belief system to help them comprehend their bewildering world. The whole region is a treasure trove of discoveries, evidence showing that death and burial were central to mankind's developing beliefs. Near to Göbekli Tepe is the ancient settlement of Çatalhöyük. It's a remarkable window into our ancestors' lives and beliefs. Archaeologists made an amazing discovery here at Çatalhöyük. The people who lived here buried their dead in their own homes.
When people died, they were buried literally under their beds. So a hole would have been dug through this platform and the body placed inside. So literally, these people were living sometimes 10 centimetres, 20 centimetres above their lost ones. In some houses we've found one, some houses have none, but then other houses have 15. The most we've found is something like 67 in one building.
The dead of Çatalhöyük were buried with great care.
The body is placed in a crouched position, in a fetal position like this, so they're quite tightly contained within the burial cut.
Bodies appeared as if ready for rebirth, and they were given precious items to take into their new life.
We find a range of beads, stone, clay, shell and bone beads. And these we might find scattered in the burial around the neck area of a burial.
But burials aren't the only evidence emerging of early religious practice. We are starting to get closer to our ancestors' gods. northern Israel, compelling evidence has been discovered of this giant leap in religious thinking.
I mean, it was nothing special, just excavated. And then it came out, you see that it's a figurine. But it was all covered with dirt and mud, and of course we didn't clean it, because if you start cleaning it in the field, you may destroy it. So it was taken, as a big, dirty lump of sediment. But you saw the general shape of a figurine. It went to the lab. And only after the cleaning, it turned out to be the most beautiful figurine ever found in their culture. We believe that this was a mother goddess figurine, a kind of goddess that the entire tribe worshipped. What is really very prominent are the eyes. The diagonal eyes are usually 3 or 4 times bigger than the usual eyes on human face. So the eyes are very emphasized on our figurines. So it's something not natural, it's supernatural.
Many more Mother Goddess figurines have been found in Shahar Golan. They are vital evidence of a seismic shift in religious thought.
For the first time, we can really talk about a kind of goddess, because this is the first time in human evolution that you can see that all the figurines are exactly the same. In our site, we have about 120 clay figurines. They always have an elongated head, they have diagonal eye, very prominent eye, they have a nose, they have ear and earrings, you can see the navel, you can see fat fold. It was probably a central figure, a goddess, which were worshipped by this community. And everybody, when he was thinking about this goddess, knew that she has this specific type of eyes and specific head, and there was probably a whole mythology about it.
The people of Shahar Golan revolutionized religion. They didn't perceive their mother goddess as the one god. They were not monotheist, but they were the first people in history to create a uniform idea of God.
They were the first one to crystallize a concept that, okay, we are worshipping a specific figure and not everybody can do it as he wished. You must do it in this way, and there was right and wrong.
The idea of a uniform image of God came hand in hand with the birth of organized, established religion. The establishment of central places of uniform worship was one of the first steps in the long journey to civilization. As people gathered in ever greater numbers around their temples, they built bigger and bigger communities to live in. A process that began in the East transformed the West and the rest of the world. Today, almost every part of the world has a place of worship. Churches, mosques, temples at their heart. That was the same in the world's first cities in Mesopotamia when they began to emerge around 6,000 years ago. Mari in modern-day Syria was one of the largest and was built to a grand and deliberate plan. A walled circular city with the river Euphrates diverted through it, and at its heart, a temple.
احنا حاليا بمعبد الألفية الثالثة كما بتشاهدون. هلا حاليا احنا بالقاعة المقدسة. خلفي على الضبط هو قدس الأقداس مثل ما بنسميه المذبح. ببداية القرن الماضي وجدت عدة لقى موجودة هنا عبارة عن جرار كبيرة كانت موجود فيها الأضاحي.
The temple and worship were central to life in the first cities of Mesopotamia, and the organization of religion had a profound and lasting influence on society.
We have here in Mari the first signs of a real society, a real organized society. For instance, in the middle of the city, you have the palace and you have the temples around, which is clearly the sign of a hierarchy. You have the power, you have the religion, and it's on the top of this kind of pyramidal society.
Fabulous statues have been discovered in the temples of Mari. They bring the religion of this ancient culture vividly back to life.
This is a statue of a worshipper. This is a typical kind of statue that we found in a temple in Mari. They are typically bold. The beard is often represented like this, and the eyes is also very typical. You have this lapis lazuli disc inside a shell, and the eyebrows are made of bitumen. The hands are gathered on the chest, which is a devotion, a sign of devotion. And so most of the time, they have an inscription on the shoulder, on the back, where he put his name. Now we know who he is. His name is Shibum. And this is the typical representation of worshipper.
Wealthy citizens commissioned statues of themselves and placed them in specific temples dedicated to particular gods and goddesses.
Each god has a specificity, and it depends on what you want. You will go to this god or that god. This is why you put your statue inside a specific temple.
Gone was the idea of a uniform image of a goddess. In Mari, there was a whole host of gods and goddesses, each looking very different, each with a particular role. The gods and goddesses of Mari were worshipped across Mesopotamia. They are amongst the first named gods in human history.
We know that there were many goddesses and gods. We know them by their myths. There's a lot of history about those gods. You have Ishtar, for instance. She's the goddess of love, and she's also the goddess of war. You have the sun god. You have the god of the agriculture. This Mesopotamian pantheon is the beginning of all the other pantheon of gods. And we always have the main god, his wife, and through the Greek, the Romans, we have the exact same panel of gods.
The Parthenon, the temple to Athena, on the Acropolis in Athens survives as a fabulous reminder of the enduring power of the ancient gods. Many of the statues and friezes that once adorned the Parthenon are now in the British Museum in London.
The Greeks thought that the gods were like humans, but just a bit bigger, a bit brighter, a bit shinier. Here you have Dionysus and Selene, the god of the moon, and Aphrodite, the god of sexual love. So although the Greek gods didn't always get on with one another, they drank a lot, they had affairs with one another, they had arguments the whole time, but they were nonetheless godlike. You have to realise that the ancient Greeks, gods and demigods and spirits were everywhere in the world. This was how they explained what was going on around them. So when they saw the tides rise and fall, when they saw the grain ripening in the fields, they knew, they didn't think, they knew that this was the power of a god or gods who would make this all happen for them.
The whole ancient world's view of deity was that there is one overall force, but it's manifested, that force, it's not a personal force you would necessarily talk to, it's manifested by all the powers of nature. So the sky, the sea, all the different phenomena of the world are respected. It was seen as a positive thing. They're respected, they're honored. Let's honor the powers of the wind, of the sea.
The Romans adopted the Greek pantheon of gods, adapting their names. Zeus became Jupiter, Dionysus became Bacchus, Aphrodite became Venus. The Greeks and Romans had hundreds of gods, one for every eventuality.
If you were sick or you were dying, you needed health, you need prosperity, you're going on a journey, you need guidance on your journey, safety. It made sense to the Romans, to the Greeks, to honor that specific deity, both in terms of effectiveness, because you're going right to the source, but also the sense of giving respect to that god at that temple where those priests are concentrating on this particular idea.
In some ways, this meant it was very exhausting being a Greek because you had to rush around keeping all these various gods on side. But it also meant you always had a chance of success. So if Apollo hadn't heard your prayer, then maybe Aphrodite would. And I think actually it encouraged men and women to be very tolerant. So if they had a visitor from Egypt, for instance, they were quite ready to believe that that Egyptian might bring an Egyptian god who also had power and therefore became embraced as a new cult.
The many gods of the ancient world coexisted peacefully for millennia until one man challenged the idea of polytheism. Not Abraham, but the ruler of one of the oldest civilizations of the ancient world, Egypt. Egypt was polytheist, a land that seemed full of gods. At the top of the Egyptian pantheon, Ra, the sun god, headed a group of 9 gods known as the Great Ennead. But 3,500 years ago, Pharaoh Amenhotep launched a revolution in thinking. Egypt's many gods and the idea of polytheism itself were under attack.
As far as we can tell, Amenhotep is the first Egyptian to be able to look critically at the religion of his own society, to step outside it and to judge it. And he seems to have judged it as being very largely empty. Instead, he could see only a single god, a single source of power, which is what you can see up there in the sky, the sun, and that's all that matters, that's all there was.
Amenhotep's revolutionary idea was to dismiss Egypt's many gods and worship just one, Aten, the sun god.
He wanted to honor the immediate power of the sun, as it is, after all, the only source of non-terrestrial energy and power that you can actually see. Everything else is imagination. And that seems to have been his drive towards simplicity. Nothing matters except the immediacy of the experience of the sun as it appears in the horizon and warms you and obviously brings life to everything.
Amenhotep's devotion to his new god and his commitment to change Egypt's centuries-old polytheism made him change his name.
He began his reign with the name Amenhotep, a name that honors the traditional god of Thebes. But the king changed his name to Akhenaten, which honored the disk of the sun, the Aten.
Akhenaten even built a whole new city to honor the one god and moved his entire court there. He called it Akhetaten, meaning the horizon of the sun.
This is the mansion of the Aten, one of the 2 main temples, places of worship. In some respects, the temple was laid out quite traditionally. It's a series of courtyards arranged along a central axis. But what is most distinctive is that there are no roofed buildings inside. The courtyards are open to the sky because they're there so that you can appreciate and make offerings and prayers to the visible disk of the sun. The statement that Akhenaten is trying to make is that God, the divine essence, is visible. The power of the sun is up there, and it's there directly to be appreciated. You don't need the elaborateness of enclosed temples with their many statues.
Akhenaten's devotion to one god was quickly taken up by his royal entourage.
This is the tomb of one of the most powerful figures at the court. His name is Ai. He's the fan bearer on the right hand of the king. And behind him is shown his wife. Her name is Ti. And they're both kneeling with their arms raised in adoration to the rising sun. And above them comes the columns of hieroglyphs of a long hymn, which is directed at the Aten. It celebrates the rising of the Aten each day.
Horizon of heaven, Aten. You created the earth by your will. You alone existed. You set every person in his place.
The hymn of Ai is a remarkable statement of Akhenaten's monotheism. For him, there is only one God.
There's no reference to other gods. Akhenaten sweeps all that away. There's no interest in the other forms of divinities who you might imagine are actually parts of the sun. So it's a great simplification. They're not damned, they are just excluded.
Akhenaten died in 1336 BC, believing he'd changed religion in Egypt forever. But an archive of nearly 400 cuneiform tablets discovered here in the 19th century reveal his experiment with monotheism died with him.
When he died, Egypt returned to the traditional worship of Amun-Ra at Thebes and all the other many divinities of local places.
Akhenaten's son, Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of the Aten, came to the throne. During his short reign, the worship of the Aten declined, and older gods like Amun were restored. To recognize this reversal, Tutankhaten changed his name to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. Egypt's brief experiment with monotheism was over. Polytheism was too deeply rooted in the religious culture of the ancient world to be swept away so lightly. The modern belief in one God, monotheism, would have to overcome massive resistance if it were to succeed.
The idea of one true God would have been an extraordinary and shocking idea. Because how can you have just one God when these men and women have known for thousands of years that the world was inhabited by many spirits and gods and demigods? Would have been heart-stoppingly radical.
But monotheism wasn't finished. The Middle East was still to play a central role in the story of its growth. The next radical transformation a short distance from Egypt, in Canaan.
Polytheism was deeply rooted in this part of the world for many millennia. Well, this, in fact, exemplifies the whole thing. I'm standing on the steps to the altar. This altar was constructed in the 3rd millennium BC, early Bronze Age. And it served the temple, which is on the right-hand side and behind us.
Canaan was the promised land the Bible says God promised to Abraham. But scholars today look beyond the Bible for evidence of Abraham's people, the early Israelites.
When we get to the formative period in Israelite history, archaeology is the queen of the battle. And archaeology is the center, because archaeology provides you with real-time evidence. If I take a spade now here, and in front of the camera, try and start excavating here, in the same very moment, I am into the real historical layer, archaeological layer, whatever you want to call it. This is not the case with the biblical text. So we all need to remember that.
The excavations here in Megiddo, in the center of Canaan, seem to show that the early Israelites continued to worship the same polytheistic gods as the Canaanites.
When we speak about the transition from Canaanite life, let's say in the second millennium, to Israelite in the late second and beginning of the first millennium BC, I think from the cultic point of view, nothing happened. I mean, there is a continuity.
Other sites also point to the worship of many gods in this region. 70 kilometers away, archaeologists are excavating Tel Hazor, the ancient capital of Canaan.
It is the largest site in the country. It's more than 200 acres, with a population of some 15 to 20,000 people, which makes it comparable to Paris, London, New York of today. It's a major site.
There is clear evidence here of the many gods of Canaan.
We are in a place of worship of the Canaanite period. You can see, first of all, by the standing stones, which were worshipped. We have the names of the different gods and their functions and this and that and the other. Like Adu, yes, the weather god, was a very, very important god here at Hatzor. He was definitely not the only one. The god Sin was worshipped, the moon god was worshipped, the god El was worshipped.
The Canaanites worshipped a pantheon of gods headed by El, his wife Asherah, and Baal. And when the Israelites emerged in Canaan, they appeared to have worshipped the same Canaanite gods.
The chief god of the Canaanites is called El. So is called the chief god of the Israelites. He's called El, or Elohim. There is no question that a lot of cult practices and ideas were taken over.
The Bible confirms that the Israelites worshipped these Canaanite gods.
The prophets keep complaining that why are you worshiping this God? Why are you worshiping Baal? Why are you doing this and that and the other? You are not supposed to do it. You are supposed to stay away from Canaanite. You have to separate yourself from the Canaanite people as well as the Canaanite religion, and so on and so forth.
The early books of the Bible are full of the struggle for the hearts and minds of the Israelites, a battle between the old pagan Canaanite gods and the one God who revealed himself as Yahweh.
אנוכי אדוני אלוהיך אשר הוצאתיך מארץ מצרים מבית עבדים, לא יהיה לך אלוהים אחרים על פניי.
Your God. You shall have no other gods before me.
It's the first of the 10 Commandments given to Moses by God on Mount Sinai.
So this is what we have in the time of Moses. A commandment of worshiping the one without negating the existence of the others.
The Israelites had Yahweh as their God, but they didn't yet conceive of him as the only God. Despite the commandments and the warnings of Moses and other prophets, the Israelites still persisted with the worship of other gods, including females.
This little clay figurine was found in my excavations in a large site in northern Israel, south of the Lake of Galilee, called Tel Rehov, a place which is not mentioned in the Bible, but yet it was a very important city during the 10th and 9th and 8th centuries BC. In the field, one of our volunteers just picked her up and ran to me and showed it to me, and I was very pleased. You know, it's always a pleasure.
The figurine is nearly 2,900 years old. It's an example of thousands of female figurines discovered throughout the region in the Israelite period.
She's holding here a baby. She's holding a baby. So she's a mother. She's a mother goddess in this case. We think that this is Asherah, though this is one of the nice examples of this type of figurines from around 900 BC, when Israelite religion was not yet completely monotheistic, that's for sure.
The Israelites were still worshipping the Canaanite goddess Asherah. They imagined her as the wife of their god, Yahweh.
We have, for example, inscriptions on jars which say, to Yahweh and his Asherah. Okay, so there is Yahweh and there is, if you want to say, Mrs. Yahweh, Asherah. The Israelites worship many gods, unlike what is more or less common belief that all Israelites worship Yahweh. So there is clear evidence that Yahweh had to fight for a long time and quite a fierce battle until he was accepted as the one and only.
It took several centuries before the Israelites finally embraced Yahweh as the one and only God. And to make that happen, needed a catastrophe. "2,600 years ago, Jerusalem is attacked by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. The city is sacked, the house of Yahweh, the temple, is destroyed, and thousands of Jews are taken as slaves into exile. Yahweh seemed defeated.
It was a theological catastrophe because the simple fact was that the God of Israel was defeated by the God of the Babylonians. This was the way people looked at it at that time, and they had to explain what had happened. They had either to yield and forget all about this and be part of the Babylonian culture, or they had to come up with this, with an explanation.
In captivity in Babylon, the Israelites developed a revolutionary explanation for the defeat of their God, Yahweh.
They came up with an amazing, way of philosophical already, explanation of what exactly had happened and how it came about that the God of Israel was supposedly defeated, but in fact he won, They say, well, let's think about this. The God of Israel is so powerful that he is universal, that he rules everything, that he decides everything, that he sent the king of Babylonia. The king of Babylonia was no more than a little peon in the hands of the God of Israel to be sent to punish the apostasy of the Israelites. No more than that.
The winning God wasn't the Babylonian God. He was Yahweh using the Babylonians to punish the Israelites. So Yahweh is not just the Israelites' God, he's the Babylonians' God. He's everyone's God. An unknown prophet given the name Isaiah created the first defining statement of monotheism and changed the course of human history.
There is no other God besides me. I am the creator of good and evil. I am the creator of light and darkness. There is no one beside me.
It's absolutely a watershed moment in history. There's a sense in terms of religion that it's maybe the greatest idea. if you judge greatest ideas by the ideas that really had lasting impact.
The Persians under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon and allowed the Israelites to return to Jerusalem. They took their new idea of one universal God back with them. But the Jews didn't spread their brilliant new idea to the rest of the world. That was the work of another religion, built on the foundations of Judaism. Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem. The Church of the Nativity marks the spot where it's believed he was born. At the Jewish festival of Passover, Jesus came to preach in Jerusalem. Seen as a threat to the Roman peace, he was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. Today, pilgrims still walk the route Jesus is supposed to have taken to his crucifixion.
Third station, here Jesus falls the first time. Here Jesus meets the old women of Jerusalem. A great crowd of people follow him, including women who beat their breasts and lamented over him.
The route ends at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the traditional site of his crucifixion and burial.
Weep for yourselves and for your children, for if they do this,
2,000 years later, Christianity has 2 billion followers. But how did the Christian version of monotheism finally overcome polytheism to be the largest religion in the world?
Jesus Christ himself didn't invent a world religion. He lived a life and he was an exemplar of his faith. It was others who came after him who developed his ideas, the personal relationship that he was said to have had with his Father, God, into a belief system, into a world faith.
Jesus didn't spread Christianity and monotheism. That was the work of another man, Saul of Tarsus. Blinded by a vision of Jesus then miraculously healed, Saul took up the faith and changed his name to Paul. Paul believed that Jesus' message of spiritual renewal should be preached to Jews and non-Jews, Gentiles. Both could be baptized and follow Jesus.
What Paul says is, you know, if Gentiles, non-Jews, have faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they believe in the Messiah, Jesus, aren't they really children of Abraham in a spiritual sense?
Paul's missionary journeys took him from Syria to Cyprus and Asia Minor to Greece.
So what he starts doing is missionizing, traveling, first of all through Asia Minor, or Turkey, and he goes to little towns and villages. He crosses over into Greece, and he preaches not to the Jews or the synagogue. Often he'll go to a synagogue, but he'll end up street preaching, or he'll rent a hall, like he does in one case, kind of a school, and people come to hear him give lectures.
Paul traveled to one of the greatest cities on earth. Ephesus was the capital of Roman Asia, the second largest city in the world. Nearly 500,000 people lived here. It was full of buildings celebrating the many gods of the Greco-Roman world, including the massive temple of Artemis. If Paul could convert the Greek and Roman pagans of Ephesus to Christianity, then the new religion could spread through the empire.
If you think about the achievement of Paul and what he did in bringing Christianity to the world, it's just staggering to think about, because when Paul lands, in every city are dozens and dozens of temples, beautiful buildings, edifices to all of these gods and goddesses of Greece and Rome and Egypt. That's not going to go away very easily.
Here in Ephesus, Paul and his fellow missionaries wrote and preached the new gospels of Christianity, a religion distinct from its roots in Judaism that would eventually take the idea of monotheism beyond its Middle Eastern home. Paul took the Christian message to Rome, the capital of the empire and the heart of paganism. Here, Christians worshipped in secret, but soon Paul incurred the wrath of the pagan authorities. Paul is believed to have been executed in Rome in the reign of the Emperor Nero. The Abbey of the Three Fountains marks the spot where Paul was beheaded.
So this is really the spot that's the pillars commemorating the execution of Paul. He was beheaded traditionally in this spot. And the pillar not necessarily marks where it happened, but as a commemoration that it was in this area. And then the three fountains, where his head, according to the tale, bounced and bounced and bounced again, and God gave kind of witness to his greatness.
Christianity continued to be a persecuted religion in the Roman Empire. Christians were regularly martyred for their refusal to accept the Roman gods. It would take another 250 years and one final battle for monotheism to triumph.
On this bridge where I'm standing, the Milvian Bridge, this great battle took place. It basically had to do with the control of Rome, who's going to be the next emperor. But looking back on it, it really had to do with what will be the future of the entire Western world. There's a sense in which you could say monotheism hung in the balance on this bridge.
In the year 312, two armies met here, outside Rome, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. On one side, the army of Constantine, the emperor of Rome's eastern provinces. Opposing him, Maxentius, a usurper. Maxentius's army was driven into the Tiber, where Maxentius drowned. In the Great Forum of Rome, Constantine erected a triumphal arch as a symbol of his victory. The following year, the new emperor proclaimed religious toleration in the Roman Empire. "70 years later, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman world. It's the triumph of an idea, the belief in one God, an idea that came from the Middle East and now dominates the West. It's also an idea that has been taken on by other religions. In the next program, we will discover how a new monotheist religion, Islam, embodied and adapted the faith of Abraham, spreading at extraordinary speed across the Middle East and beyond.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
It's a continuation of the Middle East's extraordinary influence on beliefs. From the earliest beginnings in Göbekli Tepe, through the evolution of the great pantheon of ancient gods, to the earliest experiences of monotheism, right through to the world religions of today.